The autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves as I pulled into the parking garage of Whitmore Industries, clutching a bag of David's favorite Italian takeout from Romano's. I had dressed carefully that morning in my navy blue dress and pearl earrings, wanting to look perfect for surprising my husband at his CEO office. The towering glass building gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and I felt proud walking toward the entrance where David worked so hard for our future. But as I approached the main doors, a large red and white sign stopped me cold, authorized personnel only. When I confidently told the security guard that I was the CEO's wife, he burst into hearty laughter. Ma'am, I see his wife every day. There he is now, coming out with his wife right now. My heart shattered as I watched David emerge, arm in arm with a stunning blonde woman I had never seen before. My world tilted on its axis as I watched my husband of 5 years tenderly brush a strand of golden hair from the woman's face. She wore an elegant cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly teaching salary, and diamonds sparkled from her ears in the afternoon light. David whispered something that made her laugh, a melodic sound that echoed off the concrete walls of the parking garage. Then he kissed her forehead with the same gentle affection he used to show me during our honeymoon in Vermont. The security guard, a heavyset man with salt and pepper hair and kind brown eyes, noticed my face had drained of all color. His name tag read Frank Thompson, and genuine concern replaced his earlier amusement as he offered me a cushioned chair near the reception desk. Are you feeling all right, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, each one more devastating than the last. Maybe David had a twin brother I never knew about. Maybe this was some elaborate business arrangement I didn't understand. But deep in my gut, I knew the truth was far worse than my imagination could conjure. Instead of screaming or confronting the situation head-on, something inside me clicked into survival mode. I forced a weak smile and told Frank I must have been mistaken about which building my husband worked in. Frank's weathered face softened with sympathy. Happens all the time in these corporate districts. All these glass towers look identical. He gestured toward the blonde woman who was now sliding into a gleaming silver Mercedes convertible. That's Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, the CEO's wife. Sweet as pie, that one. Comes by every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork, always bringing Mr. Whitmore his favorite coffee from that fancy place downtown called Arabica Dreams. The name hit me like a physical blow. Catherine Whitmore. This woman had stolen not just my husband, but my very identity. I watched the Mercedes glide out of the parking structure with the grace of a swan, while my own battered Honda Civic suddenly felt like a rust bucket in comparison. Frank continued chatting, unaware that he was describing my replacement in excruciating detail. She's got this amazing background, too. Frank went on, clearly smitten with the imposter. Used to be a professional ballet dancer before she got into charity work. Raised over $200,000 last year for the Children's Hospital. Always dressed to the nines and never too busy to ask about my granddaughter's soccer games. A ballet dancer, of course. I looked down at my sensible shoes and department store dress, suddenly feeling frumpy and ordinary. David had always criticized my appearance in subtle ways, suggesting I could dress more professionally or style my hair differently. Now I understood why nothing I did ever seemed good enough for him. My hands trembled as I thanked Frank and walked back to my car, my mind already formulating a plan that surprised me with its calculating coldness. Instead of driving home to cry or confronting David immediately, I decided to follow the silver Mercedes from a safe distance. My Honda's engine sputtered to life, and I merged into traffic 3 cars behind the convertible. The Mercedes led me through increasingly upscale neighborhoods, past manicured lawns and elaborate fountains, until we reached the exclusive gated community of Millbrook Gardens. I had heard about this area but never seen it firsthand. The houses here cost more than David and I could earn in a lifetime of teaching and whatever salary he claimed to make at Whitmore Industries. I parked across the street and watched in stunned silence as Catherine used a remote control to open ornate iron gates, then drove up a circular driveway toward a massive colonial mansion with white pillars and bay windows. The property sprawled across at least 2 acres, complete with a 3-car garage, and what appeared to be a guest house in the back. This was the kind of home David and I had dreamed about during our late-night conversations, the place where we would raise children and grow old together. But here was my husband's other wife, living our dream life, while I sat in a rental house counting pennies and clipping coupons. David had always told me we needed to live frugally while he built up his career and save for our future home. He insisted we couldn't afford luxuries vacations or even dinner at nice restaurants because every dollar needed to go toward our someday house fund. The realization that David had been lying about our financial situation for years felt like ice water in my veins. How many times had I denied myself small pleasures, worn the same clothes, until they fell apart or declined invitations because we supposedly couldn't afford them? How many times had David come home with stories about budget cuts at work or unexpected expenses while secretly funding this elaborate double life? As I sat in my car watching the mansion where my husband apparently lived his real life, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. If Catherine Whitmore didn't exist, then I was about to create her. The drive back to our cramped rental house felt like traveling between two different universes. David's red Toyota was missing from the driveway, which meant he was probably staying late at the office again, or so he would claim when he eventually came home around 10 o'clock. Our tiny two-bedroom house suddenly felt even smaller, with its peeling paint on the front porch and the leaky faucet in the kitchen that David always promised to fix but never did. I walked through rooms that now seemed like stage props in an elaborate lie. The secondhand furniture we had bought together, the wedding photos on the mantle, the joint checking account statements scattered on his desk. Everything felt contaminated by deception. David had convinced me that this modest lifestyle was temporary, a stepping stone toward the prosperity that his CEO position would eventually provide. But now I knew he had been living in luxury while keeping me trapped in poverty. My hand shook as I approached David's home office, a converted bedroom where he claimed to do important work in the evenings. The desk was an antique roll-up that he had inherited from his grandfather, and David always kept it locked when he wasn't using it. For 5 years, I had respected that boundary, believing it contained confidential business documents that I wasn't supposed to see. But respect was a luxury I could no longer afford. I found a silver letter opener in the kitchen drawer and worked it into the lock mechanism until something clicked. The desktop rolled up to reveal a treasure trove of evidence that made my stomach clench with rage and heartbreak. A second cell phone sat charging next to his laptop, its screen lighting up with text messages from Catherine about dinner reservations and weekend plans. Credit card statements showed purchases at jewelry stores, high-end restaurants, and luxury hotels, all charges that never appeared on our shared bank account. The most devastating discovery was a stack of property documents held together with a rubber band. David had purchased the Millbrook Gardens mansion 3 years ago, paying cash from accounts I never knew existed. The purchase date corresponded perfectly with a period when he had told me about serious financial problems at work, when he had insisted we needed to cut back on groceries and cancel our cable television subscription. I photographed everything with my phone, my teacher's instinct for documentation kicking into overdrive. Bank statements revealed that David had been systematically transferring money from our joint savings account, money I had contributed from my teaching salary, into private accounts that funded his secret life. The numbers were staggering. While I had been bringing home leftover cafeteria food and shopping at thrift stores, David had been spending thousands of dollars on his other wife. The second phone buzzed with an incoming call from Catherine. Her contact photo showed a professionally taken headshot of a woman who looked like she had stepped off the cover of a magazine. I let it go to voicemail, but the preview message made my blood run cold. "Hi, honey, just confirming our appointment with Dr. Martinez tomorrow at 2. I can't wait to see our little one again." Dr. Martinez. An appointment to see our little one. The implications hit me like a freight train. Catherine wasn't just playing the role of David's wife, she was pregnant with his child. This wasn't a temporary affair or a midlife crisis. David had created an entirely separate family while lying to my face every single day. I spent the next 4 hours methodically searching through every document, every password-protected file, and every hidden compartment in David's desk. What I discovered painted a picture of deception so elaborate that it bordered on genius. David hadn't just been cheating. He had been living a completely fabricated existence. Through careful internet research, I discovered that Catherine's real name was Jessica Martinez, a 28-year-old aspiring actress from Los Angeles who had moved to our city 2 years ago. Her social media profiles showed a struggling performer, taking waitressing jobs and background roles in local commercials. But her recent posts told a different story entirely. She was wearing jewelry that I recognized as pieces David had given me for our anniversary pieces. He later claimed had been stolen from his car during a business trip to Chicago. The timeline of her transformation from struggling actress to wealthy CEO's wife coincided perfectly with David's promotion to the top position at Whitmore Industries. He had essentially hired her to play the role of his wife while keeping me as his legitimate spouse hidden away in suburban mediocrity. The audacity of it was breathtaking. At 9:30 that evening, I heard David's key in the front door. I quickly closed his desk and arranged everything exactly as I had found it, then positioned myself on the living room couch with a stack of student papers to grade. Years of teaching had taught me how to maintain a calm exterior even when chaos raged inside my mind. "Hey, sweetheart," David called out, his voice carrying the same warm tone he had used throughout our marriage. "Sorry I'm so late. Board meeting ran long, and then I had to deal with some budget issues that couldn't wait until tomorrow." He appeared in the doorway carrying a bouquet of grocery store roses, the kind that cost $9.99 at the checkout counter. The same man who had probably spent hundreds on flowers for Jessica was giving me wilted carnations and baby's breath. But I smiled and accepted his kiss on the cheek, playing my role as the grateful wife, just as expertly as Jessica played hers as the pampered mistress. "How was your day?" he asked, settling into his recliner with the evening newspaper. "Anything interesting happen at school?" I looked at my husband of 5 years, this man who had shared my bed and my dreams, who had promised to love and cherish me through better and worse. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his expensive suit wrinkle-free. Despite his claims of working 14-hour days, he looked successful, confident, and completely comfortable in his deception. "Nothing special," I replied, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions threatening to tear me apart. "Just another ordinary day." But as I watched David read his newspaper and sip the coffee I had prepared for him, I knew that ordinary days were about to become a thing of the past. Because now I understood the rules of the game he had been playing, and I was ready to play it better than he ever imagined possible. The next morning, I called in sick to Riverside High School for the first time in 3 years, claiming a stomach bug that would require a few days to resolve. My substitute teacher plans were detailed and professional, just like everything else in my carefully constructed life as a responsible adult. But today, responsibility meant something entirely different. I returned to Whitmore Industries with a box of homemade chocolate chip cookies and 2 cups of premium coffee from Arabica Dreams, the same shop where Jessica supposedly bought David's daily caffeine fix. Frank Thompson was working the early shift, and his face lit up with surprise when he saw me approaching the security desk. "Well, hello there, Miss. Feeling better today? You looked pretty peaked yesterday afternoon." Frank's genuine concern touched something in my chest that had been frozen since discovering David's betrayal. Here was a man who cared about the well-being of a complete stranger, while my own husband had been systematically destroying my life for years. "Much better, thank you," I replied, offering him the coffee and cookies. "I wanted to apologize for my confusion yesterday. You were so kind when I was feeling dizzy, and I thought maybe I could return the favor." Frank's eyes widened with delight as he accepted the treats. "Well, aren't you just the sweetest thing? You didn't have to do this, but I surely do appreciate it. My wife passed 2 years ago, and nobody makes cookies like she used to. These smell just like Martha's recipe." Perfect. A widower with fond memories of his deceased wife would be naturally sympathetic to a woman in distress. I settled into the chair beside his desk and introduced myself as Madelyn Porter, claiming to be a family friend who was concerned about some suspicious activity around David's business dealings. The lie came surprisingly easily, and Frank's protective instincts kicked in immediately. "What kind of suspicious activity?" Frank's voice dropped to a confidential whisper, his security training evident in his alert posture. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I know when something ain't right around here." I carefully planted seeds of doubt without revealing too much about my true identity or purpose. I mentioned hearing rumors about after-hours meetings, unusual financial transactions, and concerns that David might be involved in something that could hurt innocent people. Frank's expression grew increasingly serious as he considered my words. "You know, now that you mention it, there have been some strange goings-on lately," Frank admitted, glancing around to make sure we weren't being overheard. Mr. Whitmore's been hosting private meetings in his office way past normal hours, always with the same group of people. There's Ronald Pierce from accounting, a couple of board members, and sometimes that lawyer fellow who never signs in properly at the front desk. This was valuable intelligence I hadn't expected to gather. David wasn't working alone in whatever scheme he was running. The meetings happened when Jessica visited, which suggested she was either knowingly involved in his business activities or providing the perfect cover for illegal activities disguised as romantic encounters. Frank leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. And another thing that's been bothering me, Mr. Whitmore installed a personal safe in his office about 6 months ago. Big heavy thing that took 4 men to carry up there. When I asked about it during my security rounds, he said it was for important documents. But why wouldn't he use the company vault like everyone else? A personal safe meant David was hiding something valuable enough to require private security, something he couldn't trust to normal corporate channels. Combined with the after-hours meetings and the mysterious lawyer, it painted a picture of criminal activity that went far beyond marital infidelity. "Frank, I need to ask you about something sensitive," I said, reaching across to touch his weathered hand. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the company's financial procedures? Any changes in how things are documented or processed?" Frank's expression darkened with understanding. "You think there's something crooked going on with the money side of things?" It wasn't a question. His decades of security experience had taught him to recognize the warning signs of corporate fraud. "I'm afraid there might be," I admitted, allowing genuine worry to color my voice. "And I'm concerned that good people like yourself might get hurt if this situation isn't handled properly." That afternoon, Frank introduced me to Patricia Williams, David's executive assistant, and the person who handled his daily correspondence and appointment scheduling. Patricia was a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s, with steel gray hair and the kind of professional competence that came from years of managing complex corporate operations. But beneath her efficient exterior, I detected something that looked remarkably like fear. "Frank says you're concerned about some irregularities around here," Patricia said, her voice carefully neutral, as we sat in the employee break room. "What exactly have you heard?" I repeated my story about being a concerned family friend, emphasizing my worry that David might be involved in activities that could bring down innocent employees. Patricia's carefully controlled expression began to crack as I spoke, revealing the anxiety she had been hiding behind her professional facade. "I probably shouldn't be talking about this," Patricia said, glancing nervously toward the hallway. "But there have been some things that just don't add up. Expense reports that don't match the actual activities, payments to vendors. I can't identify meetings that aren't on his official calendar, but that I'm told to block out time for anyway." The picture was becoming clearer. David had been using his position as CEO to manipulate corporate funds while maintaining plausible deniability through carefully orchestrated confusion and misdirection. Patricia had noticed the discrepancies, but had been afraid to report them because David controlled her job security and could easily destroy her career with false accusations of incompetence or insubordination. "Patricia, what would happen if these irregularities came to light?" I asked gently. "Would you be protected, or would you be blamed for not catching them sooner?" Her face went pale as she considered the implications. "Oh God, I never thought about that. If there's been fraud happening under my watch, I could be held responsible even if I didn't know about it. My oversight, my fault for not preventing it." This was exactly what I had suspected. David wasn't just stealing money. He was setting up his loyal employees to take the fall when his crimes eventually came to light. People like Patricia and Frank, who had worked honestly for decades, would see their lives destroyed while David disappeared with his stolen fortune and pregnant mistress. But I was also beginning to understand something else. David had made a critical mistake by underestimating the intelligence and integrity of the people around him. Patricia and Frank weren't just potential victims. They were potential allies with access to information and systems that could help me expose his crimes. As I left Whitmore Industries that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood: the thrill of being part of a team working toward a common goal. Frank and Patricia didn't know they had recruited me into their informal network of concerned employees, but they had unknowingly provided me with the foundation for a plan that would bring David's house of cards crashing down around his ears. The predator was about to discover that his prey had teeth. By Friday morning, I had learned that David's escape plan was far more elaborate and dangerous than I had initially imagined. Through careful questioning of Patricia during our daily coffee meetings, I discovered that David had scheduled a special board meeting for the following Thursday evening. The official agenda listed routine financial reviews and strategic planning discussions, but Patricia's growing suspicions had led her to notice several troubling details. "He's been acting strange all week," Patricia confided as we sat in the hospital cafeteria across the street from Whitmore Industries. "Yesterday, he asked me to prepare personnel files for Frank, myself, Ronald Pierce from accounting, and 3 other long-term employees. Said it was for some kind of efficiency review. But why would he need our complete employment histories for that?" My blood chilled as the implications became clear. David wasn't just planning to steal money and disappear. He was preparing to destroy the lives of everyone who might be able to expose his crimes. Frank would lose his pension after 30 years of faithful service. Patricia would face criminal charges that could send her to prison. Ronald and the others would see their careers and reputations obliterated. That afternoon, I made a decision that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I drove to our local library and used their public computers to research everything I could find about corporate fraud investigations, whistleblower protections, and the legal procedures for reporting financial crimes. The librarian, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, helped me navigate legal databases and provided me with printed copies of relevant statutes and regulations. The research revealed that David's crimes fell under federal jurisdiction, which meant that local police wouldn't have the authority or expertise to handle the case properly. I needed to contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, but first, I needed to gather enough evidence to convince them that a major investigation was warranted. That evening, David came home later than usual, carrying Chinese takeout from our favorite restaurant and apologizing profusely for working so many long hours. He seemed more affectionate than he had been in months, complimenting my appearance and suggesting that we plan a romantic weekend getaway once his current project was completed. "I know I've been neglecting you lately," he said, pulling me close as we sat on our threadbare couch. "But this deal I'm working on is going to change everything for us. We'll finally be able to buy that house we've been dreaming about, maybe even take that trip to Hawaii you've always wanted." The irony was devastating. David was promising me the life he had already been living with Jessica, using my own dreams to manipulate my emotions while he prepared to destroy me completely. But something in his tone made me realize that this wasn't just empty flattery. David was saying goodbye. He was trying to create a final pleasant memory before implementing whatever plan he had devised to eliminate me permanently. Later that night, while David slept peacefully beside me, I crept into his office and photographed every document I could find. Bank statements revealed transfers totaling over $2 million to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Legal documents showed that David had been slowly transferring ownership of our jointly held assets into shell corporations that Jessica controlled. Most chilling of all, I found a life insurance policy on me worth $500,000 purchased just 6 months earlier without my knowledge. My hands trembled as I realized the true scope of David's plan. He wasn't just going to abandon me or have me committed to a psychiatric facility. He was planning to have me killed and collect the insurance money while publicly grieving as a devoted widower. Jessica would comfort him through his tragic loss, and together, they would start their new life funded by my death benefit. The next morning, I called in sick again and drove to the federal building in downtown. Agent Diana Ross of the FBI's White Collar Crimes Division was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who listened to my story with the kind of professional attention that made me feel heard for the first time in years. She examined the evidence I had gathered and asked pointed questions about David's business activities and personal behavior. "Mrs. Porter, what you're describing constitutes multiple federal felonies," Agent Ross said, her expression grave. "We'll need to move quickly to prevent your husband from implementing his escape plan, but we'll also need your continued cooperation to gather additional evidence that will ensure conviction." Working with Agent Ross, I learned to document David's activities with the precision of a trained investigator. We installed a recording device in his office during lunch hours when Patricia could provide access, and I began wearing a wire during conversations at home. The recordings captured David discussing his plans with casual cruelty that shocked even the experienced federal agent. Through the FBI's investigation, I discovered that David had been planning this scheme for over 2 years. He had researched Jessica's background and recruited her specifically for her acting abilities and financial desperation. She genuinely believed she was married to a divorced CEO who was struggling with an unstable ex-wife who refused to sign divorce papers. David had shown her fabricated legal documents and staged photos that portrayed me as mentally ill and potentially dangerous. But the most devastating revelation came when Agent Ross revealed the full scope of David's murderous intentions. He hadn't planned to have me killed by a stranger or in a random crime. He had been slowly poisoning me with small doses of sedatives in my evening tea, documenting my resulting confusion and memory problems as evidence of mental deterioration. His plan was to gradually increase the dosage until I suffered what would appear to be a tragic overdose from prescription medication that he would claim I had been secretly abusing. Medical tests confirmed the presence of benzodiazepines in my system, drugs that I had never taken voluntarily. For months, David had been drugging me every night while I slept trustingly beside him, watching me struggle with symptoms that he was deliberately causing. The man who had promised to love and protect me had been slowly murdering me while I thanked him for being such a caring husband. The FBI's investigation revealed that David planned to trigger my accidental overdose on Thursday night immediately after framing his loyal employees for the embezzlement crimes. He would appear at the board meeting as a grieving widower, seeking justice for his company and sympathy for his personal loss. Jessica would publicly support him through his tragedy while privately celebrating their successful escape. But Agent Ross had a different plan in mind, one that would give David exactly the kind of surprise he had been preparing for everyone else. Monday morning marked the beginning of the most intense week of my life. I stopped drinking David's nightly tea, claiming that caffeine was affecting my sleep, and within 48 hours, my mental clarity returned with startling intensity. The fog that had been clouding my thoughts for months lifted completely, revealing the sharp, analytical mind that had made me an effective high school mathematics teacher. Working with Agent Ross and her team, I developed a comprehensive strategy to document David's crimes while protecting the innocent people he planned to destroy. Patricia became an unwitting ally when I convinced her to secretly photograph suspicious documents and track David's after-hours activities. Frank provided crucial intelligence about the timing and participants in David's mysterious meetings. The most challenging aspect of our operation was maintaining my facade as the confused, slowly deteriorating wife that David expected to see. I had to continue appearing slightly scattered and forgetful while actually operating with laser-sharp focus. It was like playing a complex mathematical equation where every variable had to be carefully calculated to produce the desired outcome. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected development that nearly derailed our entire plan. Sarah Fleming, an investigative journalist from the city newspaper, contacted me after receiving an anonymous tip about potential fraud at Whitmore Industries. Someone had leaked enough information to spark her professional curiosity, and she was determined to investigate regardless of the personal consequence. Mrs. Porter, I understand you might have information about irregularities at your husband's company, Sarah said when she called my cell phone. I want you to know that I protect my sources absolutely, and I believe the public has a right to know if taxpayer money is being stolen through corporate fraud. I realized that working with Sarah could provide an additional layer of protection for the innocent employees who might become David's scapegoats. If the story broke in the media simultaneously with the federal arrests, it would be much harder for David to manipulate public opinion or claim that he was being falsely accused by disgruntled employees. Sarah turned out to be exactly the kind of journalist I had hoped to find: thorough, ethical, and passionate about exposing corruption that hurt ordinary working people. She spent hours reviewing the evidence I provided, asking insightful questions that helped me understand the broader implications of David's crimes. This isn't just about embezzlement, Sarah explained as we sat in her cluttered newsroom office. Your husband has been systematically destroying the financial stability of a company that employs over 300 people. If he succeeds in looting the pension fund and development accounts, those families will lose their life savings through no fault of their own. The scope of David's betrayal expanded beyond anything I had imagined. He wasn't just stealing from the corporate accounts. He was planning to collapse the entire company and blame the failure on the employees he was framing for fraud. Hundreds of innocent people would lose their jobs, their retirement savings, and their faith in the system that was supposed to protect honest workers. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that comes before a major storm. David woke up earlier than usual and spent extra time getting dressed, choosing his most expensive suit and the gold watch I had given him for our third wedding anniversary. He seemed unusually cheerful as he ate breakfast, humming softly and complimenting the scrambled eggs I had prepared. "Big day today, sweetheart," he said, kissing my cheek before leaving for work. "That project I've been working on is finally coming together. By tomorrow morning, our whole future is going to look completely different." He had no idea how right he was, just not in the way he expected. Throughout the day, I coordinated final preparations with Agent Ross, Sarah Fleming, and our network of allies at Whitmore Industries. Patricia had arranged to stay late for the board meeting, ostensibly to take notes and provide administrative support. Frank would be working the evening security shift, giving him access to monitor who entered and left the building. Ronald Pierce, the honest CFO who had been investigating the financial discrepancies on his own, was prepared to present evidence that would contradict whatever fabricated story David planned to tell. At 5 o'clock, I received a text message from Jessica's phone. "Can't wait to celebrate tonight. Our new life starts tomorrow. Love you always, Catherine." David had been using Jessica's phone to send himself romantic messages that he would later claim proved their relationship began after his wife's tragic death. But Agent Ross had been monitoring his communications, and the messages would serve as evidence of premeditation rather than alibis for innocence. As the sun set over the city, I sat in my Honda Civic in the Whitmore Industries parking garage, wearing a wire and watching employees leave after their normal workday. Soon, only the conspirators and their intended victims would remain in the building, along with federal agents positioned throughout the structure, and a journalist ready to document the exposure of one of the most elaborate corporate fraud schemes in state history. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Ross. "All units in position. Are you ready?" I thought about the 5 years I had spent believing in David's lies, the months of slow poisoning that had nearly destroyed my mind, and the innocent people whose lives hung in the balance. Then I thought about Patricia's elderly mother, who depended on her daughter's health insurance, Frank's granddaughter, who was counting on his help with college tuition, and Ronald's wife, who was battling cancer with treatments covered by the company's medical plan. David had underestimated the power of people who fight for something bigger than themselves. "Ready," I typed back and walked through the glass doors of Whitmore Industries for what I knew would be the last time as David Whitmore's unsuspecting wife. Tonight I was going to become something he had never anticipated, his worst nightmare. The boardroom on the 15th floor of Whitmore Industries hummed with tension as David arranged his presentation materials on the polished conference table. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights twinkled like stars, creating an almost magical backdrop for what was about to become the most dramatic corporate meeting in the company's 60-year history. David had dressed for the occasion like a man attending his own coronation. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, his silk tie precisely knotted, and his hair styled with the kind of professional perfection that projected confidence and authority. He greeted each board member with warm handshakes and the kind of charismatic smile that had convinced them to trust him with their company's future. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying late on such short notice." David began, his voice carrying the measured tone of executive gravitas. "I'm afraid we're dealing with a situation that requires immediate attention to protect both our company's assets and our reputation in the business community." He activated the large wall-mounted screen and displayed the first slide of his presentation, Financial Irregularities Investigation Protecting Whitmore Industries. The irony would have been laughable if the stakes hadn't been so devastating for the innocent people he was about to destroy. Over the past several months, our internal audit procedures have uncovered a systematic pattern of embezzlement and fraud perpetrated by several long-term employees who exploited their positions of trust. David continued, clicking to a slide that showed doctored financial records and fabricated evidence. "The total amount stolen approaches $3 million, and I believe swift action is necessary to prevent further losses." Ronald Pierce, the company's chief financial officer, shifted uncomfortably in his seat as David's presentation began targeting him specifically. Ronald was a soft-spoken man in his mid-50s who had worked his way up from entry-level bookkeeper to executive leadership through 30 years of honest service. His wife Sandra was undergoing chemotherapy for breast cancer, and their medical expenses had stretched the family's finances to the breaking point. Mr. Pierce has been instrumental in hiding these transactions through complex accounting manipulations, David said, displaying forged documents that appeared to show Ronald authorizing suspicious transfers. His intimate knowledge of our systems allowed him to cover his tracks while systematically looting our development funds. The boardroom door opened quietly, and I entered with Agent Ross, Sarah Fleming, and two additional federal investigators. David's confident expression faltered for a split second before he recovered his composure, but I caught the flash of panic in his eyes as he realized his carefully orchestrated plan was falling apart. David Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy, embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder. Agent Ross announced, her badge clearly visible as she approached the conference table. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The board members erupted in confused chatter as federal agents moved to secure the room. David's face cycled through a range of emotions: shock, anger, calculation, and finally a kind of desperate charm that he had used to manipulate people throughout his career. This is obviously some kind of mistake, David said, his voice maintaining its professional calm despite the handcuffs being placed on his wrists. I think my wife is having another one of her episodes. She's been struggling with mental health issues, and I'm afraid she's involving innocent people in her delusions. This was exactly the response Agent Ross had predicted. David's final strategy was to portray me as an unstable woman whose allegations couldn't be trusted, hoping that his reputation and charm would convince people to dismiss the evidence as the ravings of a disturbed spouse. Actually, Mr. Whitmore, your wife has been working with federal investigators for the past 2 weeks. Agent Ross replied, producing a thick folder of documented evidence. We have recordings of your conversations planning these crimes, bank records showing your theft of company funds, and medical evidence proving that you've been systematically poisoning Mrs. Whitmore with sedatives. Sarah Fleming activated her digital recorder and began documenting the scene for her newspaper story. The board members, still reeling from the revelation that their trusted CEO was a criminal, listened in stunned silence as Agent Ross outlined the scope of David's crimes. At that moment, the conference room door opened again, and Jessica Martinez entered wearing a flowing maternity dress and looking radiant with the glow of early pregnancy. She had come to collect David for their celebration dinner, expecting to find him wrapping up a routine business meeting before they began their new life together. Instead, she found herself face to face with me for the first time, two women who had unknowingly shared the same husband while living completely different versions of the same lie. David, what's happening? Jessica asked, her voice small and confused, as she took in the scene of federal agents and handcuffs. Who are all these people, and who is she? The moment of confrontation between David's two wives was emotionally charged in ways I hadn't anticipated. Looking at Jessica, I didn't feel the hatred or jealousy I had expected. Instead, I saw another victim of David's manipulation, a young woman who had been convinced that she was building a legitimate life with a man who loved her. Jessica, my name is Madelyn Porter, I said, gently stepping forward with my hands visible and non-threatening. I'm David's actual wife. We've been married for 5 years, and I live in the house on Maple Street, where David comes home every night after visiting you. Jessica's face went through the same emotional journey I had experienced in the parking garage: confusion, disbelief, and then devastating understanding. Her hand moved protectively to her pregnant belly as the reality of her situation became clear. That's impossible, she whispered, looking between David and me. He told me he was divorced. He showed me the papers. He said his ex-wife was mentally ill and refused to sign the final documents. Agent Ross produced copies of David's fabricated divorce papers, medical records, and the elaborate fictional narrative he had created to convince Jessica of my supposed instability. The documentation revealed the extraordinary lengths David had gone to maintain his double life, including staged photographs and false legal documents that would have convinced any reasonable person. Miss Martinez, you've been the victim of an elaborate fraud, Agent Ross explained with professional compassion. Mr. Whitmore recruited you specifically to play the role of his wife while he committed federal crimes using both identities. You're not in legal trouble, but we'll need your cooperation to ensure that justice is served. As David was led away in handcuffs, he made one final attempt to manipulate the situation. Madelyn, please don't do this, He called out, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine emotion. I love you. Everything I did was for us, for our future. Don't let them destroy what we built together. But I had learned to recognize the difference between David's performed emotions and genuine feeling. His declaration of love was just another tool of manipulation, designed to make me doubt the evidence of my own eyes and experience. The only thing we built together, David, was a lie. I replied, my voice steady and clear. And now everyone can see exactly what that lie was worth. As federal agents escorted David from the building, Patricia, Frank, and Ronald emerged from the shadows where they had been watching the arrest. Their faces showed a mixture of relief, vindication, and the kind of gratitude that comes from having their lives and reputations saved by the courage of someone willing to fight for truth. The predator had finally been caught, but the real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, a bright and airy space overlooking the park where children played on swing sets, while their parents watched from nearby benches. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, illuminating the framed newspaper article on my refrigerator. Local teacher exposes multi-million-dollar corporate fraud saves jobs. Sarah Fleming's investigative series had won a state journalism award and prompted legislative reforms in corporate oversight procedures. David was serving a 25-year federal sentence without possibility of parole. The evidence we had gathered proved overwhelming in court, and his legal team had eventually advised him to accept a plea bargain rather than risk an even longer sentence at trial. The judge had been particularly harsh in his sentencing remarks, noting that David's crimes went beyond simple theft to include attempted murder and the systematic destruction of innocent lives. The mansion in Millbrook Gardens had been seized by federal authorities and sold to compensate Whitmore Industries for the stolen funds. Ironically, as David's legal wife, I had inheritance rights to any legitimately acquired assets, which provided me with financial security I had never experienced during our marriage. The money felt tainted at first, but Agent Ross helped me understand that using it to rebuild my life was a form of justice, rather than profiting from crime. Jessica had moved back to Los Angeles to be closer to her family during her pregnancy. We had maintained an unexpected correspondence through email, two women bonded by our shared experience of being manipulated by the same master deceiver. She named her daughter Grace, telling me in a letter that my grace toward her during our confrontation had inspired her to find strength she never knew she possessed. I could have hated you, Jessica wrote. You had every right to see me as the enemy who stole your husband, but instead you helped me understand that I was as much a victim as you were. That kindness changed how I see myself and how I want to raise my daughter. Patricia Williams had been promoted to Chief Financial Officer at Whitmore Industries, replacing Ronald Pierce, who had decided to retire early and focus on his wife's recovery from cancer. The board of directors had implemented comprehensive new oversight procedures to prevent similar fraud in the future, and Patricia's integrity had become the foundation for rebuilding trust within the company. Frank Thompson had received a commendation for his role in exposing the crimes and had been promoted to head of corporate security. His pension was not only protected, but enhanced by the grateful board of directors. During our monthly coffee meetings, Frank often spoke about how the experience had reminded him that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they worked together for justice. You know what I learned from all this, Frank said during one of our conversations. Evil depends on good people staying quiet and minding their own business. The moment good folks start talking to each other and paying attention, the bad guys don't stand a chance. Ronald Pierce had indeed retired, but his wife Sandra's cancer treatment had been successful, and their medical expenses were covered by a special fund the company had established for employees affected by David's crimes. Ronald sent me a Christmas card with a photo of Sandra ringing the bell at the cancer center to celebrate the end of her chemotherapy treatments. My return to teaching had brought unexpected fulfillment and recognition. Using my experience with financial fraud, I had developed a comprehensive curriculum on financial literacy and recognizing manipulation tactics. My classes had become some of the most popular at Riverside High School because students understood that I was teaching them practical skills for protecting themselves in the real world. The school district had also asked me to develop workshops for other teachers about recognizing signs of domestic abuse and financial manipulation. Many educators had confided that my story had helped them understand warning signs in their own relationships or given them courage to help students who might be experiencing similar situations. Agent Ross had become an unexpected friend, someone who understood the unique challenges of rebuilding trust after experiencing betrayal on such a massive scale. She often visited my classroom to speak with students about careers in law enforcement and the importance of speaking up when they witnessed injustice. Your case changed how we approach these investigations, Diana told me during one of her school visits. We learned that victims aren't just sources of information. They can be powerful allies in the fight for justice when they're given the tools and support they need. The most profound change in my life had been internal. For years, I had defined myself as David's wife, measuring my worth through his approval and my success through his achievements. But the process of fighting for truth had revealed strengths and capabilities I never knew I possessed. I had discovered that I was not just a mathematics teacher, but a strategist, an investigator, and a person capable of inspiring others to stand up for what was right. As I prepared dinner in my sunny kitchen, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from that devastating moment in the Whitmore Industries parking garage to this place of peace and purpose. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also revealed who I truly was beneath the layers of manipulation and control. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Fleming. Madelyn, my editor, wants to discuss your book proposal. Can we meet this week? The idea of sharing my story on a larger scale both excited and terrified me. But I had learned that growth lived on the other side of fear. The experience had taught me that sometimes the most painful betrayals become catalysts for discovering inner strength we never knew we had. David had tried to make me small, confused, and powerless. But in fighting back, I had become larger, clearer, and more influential than I had ever imagined possible. My greatest victory wasn't exposing David's crimes or saving innocent jobs, though both were important. My greatest victory was discovering that I was not the helpless victim he had tried to create, but a woman capable of standing up to injustice and inspiring others to do the same. As the sun set over my new neighborhood, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain had been real, the betrayal devastating, but the growth and healing that followed had been worth every difficult step along the way. Before I close this story, I want to ask you something that's been on my mind. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone you trusted was manipulating you? And looking back, what signs did you wish you had recognized sooner? I've learned that sharing these experiences can help all of us become more aware and better protected. If this story resonated with you, or if you think it could help someone else who might be experiencing something similar, please like this video, subscribe to stay connected with stories that matter, and share it with people who might benefit from knowing that they're not alone in their struggles. Your support means everything to me and helps ensure that important stories like this reach the people who need to hear them most. Thank you for listening to my journey and for being part of a community that believes in the power of truth, courage, and second chances. I hope that whatever challenges you're facing, you'll remember that you're stronger than you know, and that sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.